And I said,
Okay, I believe it's 12 o'clock, we'll go ahead and start. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Have a roll call.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Here.
Mr. Dunce. Ms. Goodman. Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Gentili.
Here.
Mr. Suda.
Here.
Mr. Ha.
Yes. Okay, I believe our first order of business is to elect new officers for the year 2020.
I'd be happy to elect you or to nominate you as chair to continue.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Do I hear any more offers? Andrew, want to nominate yourself? No?
Are you currently vice chair?
No.
Oh, would you like to be, Kirsten?
No,
Who is vice chair anyway?
I am.
That's why he's been filling in.
Doug was chair.
Doug was chair,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
okay, all right, yeah, that's
And-
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
So I am
right.
nominated you as chair though, so,
Well, you can do vice chair if you want.
no,
I'm
thank
gonna
you.
make you chair.
No, no, thank you. No, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna say nominations closed. So, do we need a roll call for this, or
I
just?
do have a question here. Do you then nominate vice chair, treasurer, and secretary, or do we already have that in place too?
we need to go through all,
Right,
One at a time then, I guess?
right.
usually we
Okay.
do one at a time.
Gotcha.
At the start of the year, that's been the case, right, Barry?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, do we need a roll call, or just,
I think so, don't
When in doubt,
we? Do it.
do a
do
roll
it?
call.
Okay. Okay,
Mr. Okay.
have a roll call.
Mr. Peterson.
Affirmative.
Mr. Suda.
Yes.
Mr. Ha.
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Yes.
And Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Okay. Looks like I'm your new chair for this coming year. If you don't like what I do, tell me, and I'll step down and let the vice chair. Simple as that. Okay, do I hear nominations for vice chair?
Andrew, would you be interested?
Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have my plate very full this year with online and sports betting and everything at work, so.
Okay.
Hmm,
Is there somebody that would like to be vice chair, vice president?
Barry?
Can I nominate the two?
That'd be
real
fine.
quick?
I'll nominate you.
Okay, do
No
I-
hesitation.
do I hear a second? Okay,
Second,
okay.
third, fourth, whatever. You
A
got it.
roll call
Who
for
was?
Barry,
who-
Barry Peterson.
Did
Well,
you
I
make-
made the motion.
you made the
yeah,
motion.
okay, yes.
Just, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Mr. Ha.
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yeah.
Mr. Suda.
Yes. Should we have them set voting on their own nomination, or?
What was the question?
Should we?
Should they vote on their own nominations?
Usually you do, yes.
Well, I
Even though
guess
that's
that's-
sometimes awkward.
I guess that's kind of like the president votes for himself when he's voting, right?
Yep.
He doesn't stand back, he votes for himself, and he might win by one vote, that's it.
I've heard of people losing elections because they said, well, I'm gonna vote for the opposition just to be polite, and then they lose.
It's possible, it's possible. Okay, let's move on to treasurer. Do I hear nominations for treasurer?
Mr. Suda, would you be interested in that position?
No, not yet, I haven't got my feet wet.
Well,
Okay.
Isn't it usually?
our treasurer and
Okay,
secretary
Susan, right?
are, yes.
I'll nominate Susan. You're a lot prettier than the rest of us, so I'm happy to nominate you.
Oh, geez, that's when someone else gonna stand up.
so what do we have to do here? Just, then continue with existing appointed treasurer?
No, I would go through and make nominations, and
Okay,
even though it's not someone on the board, they're
okay.
still
But she handles the numbers
electing
for us.
that
so-
person.
So could I hear a nomination for Sylvia?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
moved and seconded, roll call.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Hawk,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And moving on to secretary, and again, we have a excellent one working
Actually,
that program.
no, the secretary is a board member.
Good.
Oh, okay,
Recording
that's right,
secretary
okay.
is what we
Okay,
outsource.
right, okay. So
She
could I,
does the minutes and everything, and then the secretary just signs.
okay, so the secretary this year is Barry.
Yeah.
So could I have a nomination for 2020 secretary?
Wait a minute, can you have two positions? Is this, we already got them in one, don't we?
He said I was secretary for the last year.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Good point.
What does the secretary really do? Go ahead. Are you
Basically
interested?
signs off the back part of the minutes each
Yeah.
month.
And you occasionally have to sign a document.
Of all of the positions, it is the least, it's the easiest to do.
Yeah, you're a proofreader if you want to be.
Can I nominate Jeff Dawes, even though he's not here?
You can,
Why not? We'll do that.
okay.
I'll make that nomination.
Do I hear a second?
Sure.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, nominations closed. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Hawk.
Yes. Okay. So we'll let the new officers take charge.
That's you?
Okay, let's moving on. Everybody's had a chance to review the agenda for today's meeting?
I have two, I guess I'll say additions.
Okay,
One is that at 12:30, Mr. Jim Gallagher will be joining us by phone to give us some updates on air service issues. And I should have caught this earlier when I reviewed the agenda, but the committees also need to be reappointed at this meeting.
I thought we had someplace in here on the committees. No, okay, it was just there, right, but,
We have the committee reports, but we
Right.
don't have,
um,
so I would recommend adding that under committee
Okay.
reports and discussion as committee appointments.
okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the amended agenda?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Support?
Okay. Do I hear a vote? Aye and yay? For the adjustment to the agenda?
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. Public comment?
Well, it's good to see we've got the newspaper coming in once in a while now too. It's,
Thank you.
maybe you want to say hi or anything?
Yeah, I actually would. I'm Scott Fraley. You know me because I cover the county board meetings as well, but I'm just filling in. You probably have all met Ashlyn and know that she's moved on from the News Advocate, moved on with her life. We've just hired a new reporter today. So I'm just here temporarily, kind of until she gets up to speed, and then you'll be introduced to her. Her name is Ariel. I don't know if she'll be at the next meeting, but going forward, you should expect to see her. It would be a huge help for me, since I'm recording this. If you could all just give your names, just so that I can associate your voices to what's being recorded here, if possible.
Okay, I don't see a problem doing that. Anybody have a problem doing that? Okay.
So yeah, if you could just go around the table and
Oh, can I do that right now?
you can actually start.
Julie?
Oh, I'm Julie Schmeling, recording secretary.
Thank you, Chief.
I'm Jerry Haw, new
Yeah.
chair for 2020.
Mark Bergstrom, county commissioner, member of the Packer Airport Authority,
Andrew Gentili. Phil Shuda.
Barry Peterson?
Susan Zlonsky.
Very good.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm sure everybody's had a chance to review last month's minutes. Have any comments, changes, adjustments? I do have one, and it goes back probably to Barry. It has to do with the report for the airport inspection. One of the acronyms they have in there is NOTAM.
Notice to airmen.
That is what the abbreviation stands for, and it's
Oh, notice to airmen,
Notice to
okay.
airmen, and it's basically the means by which
Yeah,
information is
okay.
communicated out to the pilot community.
Well, reading the rest of the stuff in there, I figured it was something like that, I just couldn't piece it together, because normally when you have an acronym in there, you put it at the front there and you explain what it is. Okay, and I presume someplace down the road here, you're gonna follow some kind of plan to correct item number 3 in the,
Already taken care of.
oh, you got number 3 taken care of
Yep.
already?
Yep.
Excellent.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Do I hear a vote, yes or no for it? Yes? Do I hear some yeses?
Aye.
Aye.
Nays? Okay.
We're not very cooperative today, are
There's a mighty, okay.
Actually, a correction on my comment, item 2 has been taken care of since the last meeting, but 3 is still
Oh,
outstanding.
okay, that's, you had 2 down there, but 3 looks like it's gonna take a while because you had that for June.
Yep.
Okay, treasurer's report. We have a copy of the accounts payable.
I didn't see that. in
I didn't
the-
either.
What was,
I sent it out after.
no, but the first
Oh.
page is usually the accounts payable
Right.
page.
Oh,
I didn't see that on the computer and all I saw was the revenues and expenses and the other pages for the fuel and stuff.
So we don't have that.
So we don't
I've got
have
one
it.
if you want to make copies.
No, that's from last month.
Oh, sorry.
Right, this is for
Or that,
December.
It is, yeah,
That's in the minutes, that's for last month.
yep, gotcha.
I didn't look at what you gave me, I just copied what was there.
So,
Does anybody need a copy of everything else?
of the revenues and expenses,
I thought I could pull
You
that
got
one.
one? Okay.
everybody get one of those? December,
I have it on my computer.
Just revenue and
I
expense.
looked at it. I looked at it before coming.
Phil probably, you can get one in your
Phil,
envelope, so you can have that one.
okay, no, you
Yeah,
don't,
it's not in that package.
It's not in that
Emailed it out
package, no.
separately.
that would be the last month right there. What you got in your hand, you're looking through, that's attached to the agenda, this is
The
new.
passenger facility charges, are they caught up yet, or are we still having issues on them, Barry?
they are not caught up yet.
So that's why we don't have them shown on there. And they haven't cleaned that up as far as this month for December yet.
Um,
Is that part of
That's
the
a
phone call?
question we can ask Mr. Gallagher when he's on the phone.
So on the accounts payable, we're just gonna have to go ahead and take that, or hold it?
I would, recommend that we table that until next month.
Okay, well, I'm gonna recommend that we table the December 2019 accounts payable report until January.
Need a motion on that?
Do I have a
Make
motion?
a motion to approve that.
Second,
All in favor?
we need a second and a roll call on that.
Oh, I thought you second, sorry.
No,
I'll second.
okay. Julia, roll call, and holding off on the December 2019 accounts payable because it's missing till January.
Don't we need to approve before we be paid? Or
Well, that's what I'm wondering, that's what I was asking.
generally by the time it gets to the meeting, all
It's
of
already been
those
done,
have
huh?
already been done. So
Yeah.
it's more of a formality to approve them, after the fact.
Okay, so we'll just approve two of them next month then, okay. Julie, roll call,
Mr. Peterson,
Yes,
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes?
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Hawk,
yes.
Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the December revenue and expenses, financial statement and balance sheet. Any questions, comments? Andrew, you did have the one already on the public charter values not showing up.
It's my only question, and I think this was asked previous months, was knowing there's a problem, should we still accrue? Or is there no basis on which to accrue it?
Actually, Susan, when was the last month we received PFC payment from public charters? And since you're going through the audit now, is that something they're going to wanna accrue something in?
Yeah, so that was in September, that's the last time we received anything.
Okay, but that basically takes us through the end of the fiscal year, so we're kind of okay through the end of the fiscal year, so at this point, I don't think there's a need to be accruing anything.
And then Brandon, he reached out to me,
Okay, okay,
asked for the last couple of invoices, and so I send them to him from now on,
okay,
instead of to Louis personally.
okay, okay.
Are you straight on that? We're okay now, whatever?
Yeah, there's just a new person that wants those invoices, so I'll be reaching out to him.
Okay,
And I send this month's out, because you're basically 3 months behind now. I don't know if it's a new person that he specifically reached out and asked me to send them to him instead of the other person that I sent them to, so.
1 month, 2 months, 3 months?
3 months now.
3 months?
Mhm. So if you look at that bottom line, it's a negative 40,000, that's pretty much the 2 months that we're behind. It's 20,000 each month,
okay,
so I mean, if you consider that, it's pretty spot on where you would expect to be.
But is that amount due on our books anywhere as an accounts receivable?
Not yet, but I was hoping to get those this month, but if not, I will definitely add those next month.
Is there a concern that they might go under?
I don't think so. I don't know.
All discussions to have in a half an hour.
I'm just concerned that if we don't have a receivable on the books and they were to file, then we have no record of it.
Well, they have the invoices, I've sent invoices, and then I also have proof of documentation that I email them every month with the invoices. And this is acknowledging the fact that he did ask for them and realizes that they already have.
And there is a mechanism in our contract that pretty much guarantees the airport will be made whole, because of the delayed billing for the, air service from DOT. We have the right to withhold from our payment to them any outstanding monies they owe us, so that's generally a $200,000 a month type, funds that are going through.
any other comments? Okay, so we could have a roll call?
Do we have a motion to accept?
Oh, I hear a motion. To accept, December's revenues and expenses report. Balance sheet,
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Mr. Peterson,
yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes?
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Hawk.
Yes. Okay, moving on. executive committee. I don't believe anybody met on that last month.
That's where, Barry, you wanted to have new members appointed?
Yeah.
Let's go through and see if we have anything. Let me go through A, B, and C, just to ask those questions there, then we'll go ahead and appoint new members. How's that sound? Budget committee, I don't believe that met last month, to my knowledge. The only meeting that we had was a capital projects committee that met, I think, about 3 days after our last meeting. And Doug did attend with us. And Andrew, from what I talked to Doug the other day, and from what I understand, he passed the stuff on to George to make a few modifications to the contract with Mr. Shively. But we haven't gotten anything back from George yet.
Yes, when I talked to Doug last week, he was anticipating getting something for this meeting,
Right,
but
but
that
didn't come
obviously
through.
did not come. from
Well,
George.
I talked to him the other day, and he said he's tried a couple times,
Yep.
but he wasn't able to talk to George.
Mhm.
So he was gonna give him one try today if he had a chance, otherwise we're just gonna have to go ahead and follow on through with that. And go from there.
At what point in time do we need to update the lease document? The P and P on the airport leases? I know it's in the minutes from last month, but I thought you said you were gonna make some modifications to that, and then the board would have to.
We are automatically covered under our, you're talking about our insurance?
No.
Okay, so which item are you referring to then?
The Manistee County Black Airport land lease policy from 1999 that you said you'd have to make some modifications to that, and then the board will eventually have to approve that, so should we have to get that done prior to finalizing the contract with Mr. Shively?
I would anticipate those coming together at the same meeting, since one is a prerequisite of the other, so that you're approving them kind of as a set, so you understand how they relate to each other.
Right, because I know we went over it last time, and,
Yeah, it was discussed at the committee
Right.
along with the. both
so we
the-
still need that, and we still need the deal for Mr. Shively, because I presume he's probably moving forward with his projects and so on. So we've got to get that going.
And those are items under old business.
Right,
and
okay.
When we get to that item, I'll voice some of my concerns around the
Okay.
extended time this agreement is taking.
Okay. Okay, now let's move on to appointing new committee members for 2020. And I just happened to make a copy of who's on the existing committees for 2019. If anybody wants a copy of that,
You have quite a few.
I made enough for what I thought was everybody. Just because I knew. So that's my scratchings there.
Take one more.
So anyway, you see the 2018, I just extended to 2019, and so now we're working on 2020. So, I believe we want to continue maintaining the executive committee, budget committee, and the capital projects committee. If you see my notes there, the bylaws committee, we kind of set that aside last year, because everything was kind of okay, and we decided we'd go ahead and reassign a committee when we saw a need for it. And I suspect that's still true today. And that's how I'm gonna take it. So let me open some nominations, open up the floor for nominations for the executive committee.
Well, generally, the executive committee would be the officers of the board, so the chair, vice chair, and secretary.
Oh, okay, is that how it goes? So then that would be
You and me,
got Jerry, you've got you, Jerry,
Yes, we got Jerry, Barry, and
Chair.
Jeff.
and,
Just replacing Doug, basically.
Right.
Bill, okay, is vice chair then. Who's secretary?
Um,
Jeff Tunts.
Jeff?
right.
Well, I'm confused on this, is he got two positions or what? We've got, somebody mentioned Jeff
Okay.
in as vice chair. Did I hear that, not hear that right? Is that
And
wrong?
just Jerry would be chair,
Yeah.
Barry would be vice chair, and Jeff is secretary.
Gotcha, okay.
I would recommend a motion, probably you could do it for all the committees at once,
Right.
in one motion.
Okay, do I have hear a motion for recommending the following people to be on the executive committee? Jerry, myself as chair, Barry as vice chair, and Jeff as secretary for 2020.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I hear a second? Okay. So, do we need a roll call for that, or just, okay, let's hear a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those who oppose? Okay. Moving on to the budget committee. And again, I presume the chair is on that, correct? Which would be myself. And, who else would be on that committee then?
I'd be willing to be on that, but not as chair.
Okay. Who else would like to be on the budget committee?
Help.
Okay.
I recommend you as chair.
I thought he was chair.
Oh, are you chair on that one?
Well, I would let Andrew do it, no problem.
Okay.
Andrew, would you be willing to do the chair there? Okay. Do I hear a motion for the new 2020 budget committee, consisting of myself, Jerry, Andrew as chair, and Mark as another member?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those who oppose? Okay, passed. So moving down to capital projects, committee. I would be willing to be on it again myself this year. Andrew, how about you?
If you want to participate, I would recommend, and I know you are reluctant, which I can completely understand, but with your background in flying and being a tenant, I think you would be a good addition to the capital committee.
Get your feet wet.
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Wear boots.
Any others that wanna contest the three we got so far?
Yeah.
Okay, what we've got so far is, I can be the chair of that one, if everybody's okay with that. Unless Phil or Andrew, you want to be chair? Okay. So for 2020, let me hear a motion for the folks as we got listed so far. Phil, Jerry, and Andrew, and Jerry as chair. Do I hear a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay. Do I hear a yay vote for that?
Yay.
Yay!
Yay, okay, how about a no? Negative? Okay. New 2020 capital projects committee.
Do you want a motion for the whole?
Okay. What was that?
We're just talking procedures.
Did we miss something here, or we all set?
Nope, we're good.
Okay.
It is 12:30, but there's, I kinda wanna get through about the first quarter of my presentation before we call Jim in.
Okay, you're calling him?
Because I want the board to understand where we sit, so that you basically can, respond to, and ask questions.
Okay, I'll
So,
open up the floor to the
I'm
airport
gonna
director.
skip airfares and, numbers and just go right to air service update, so, page 4.
Okay.
So December, we ended down 19% versus 2018. Performance was okay if you ignore the fact that every single flight for the month ended up being rescheduled from what was originally the published schedule. So, you could say that we had 100% of flights not on time, because the time people bought tickets for was not the time they left here or arrived here.
So that was pretty close to a continuing of what happened in November.
Except a little bit worse in
Okay.
that sense. I mentioned this last time, but we basically erased 5 years of growth this current year. These numbers are similar to where we were in 2014. And this is where we start getting into some of the issues going forward. So the Beech 1900 still is not ready for flying. That is now anticipated end of this month. The crewing issues for the 1900, at the last meeting, I had mentioned that there was an offer out to an individual to captain it. He accepted, and then about 3 days later, he changed his mind. So that's through having anyone available to fly this aircraft once it's ready at the end of this month into question. The thing that's really hurt us right now is that Ultimate Jet, who has basically been kind of our backup, and basically even though the schedule they could operate wasn't what we published, they did most of the flights in November, December, and back in September. They had entered into a contract with the NCAA, or I'm actually not sure who they contracted with, but they were contracted for NCAA basketball, and that started January 1st. So all of their spare capacity is under contract with this other contract. So they cannot regularly provide any scheduled service for us because at any point in time that aircraft could be called away under their other contract. They're probably still there available for, if there was a mechanical issue or something, if that plane was there, they could probably pull it in, but they can't commit to operating any days as of January 1st. So since January 1st, we've had a company out of Traverse City called 45 North who has been providing service on a 9-seat King Air. And that is scheduled from January 1st through this Friday. And they realized late last week that there's a question whether or not they're allowed to fly more than 4 days a week under this agreement. And different people within DOT and the FAA have different opinions on that. So there were some changes to the schedule at the very end of last week for Friday, where 45 North didn't fly. A different carrier out of Chicago did, so that changed the schedule for those passengers the night before their flights on Friday. As of this Friday, going forward, there is nobody. So all flights for the last 2 weeks of the month have been canceled. There is a hope to restart service early February. When I talked to Jim Thursday or Friday, I forget now, it's blended together, he believed, so that's the bad news. So I'm hoping well, actually, the next slide gets me into more bad news, but I'm hoping that we've reached bottom and that we can start coming out of this. Things have basically just completely fallen apart in this month of January. So on the hiring standpoint, there is a new captain that has been hired. He is now a week into his training on the particular aircraft. So it's not a case where he agreed and then changed his mind. He's actually, a third of the way through training. So that's good, but would basically provide one crew to operate our schedule of 6 days a week service through the winter. You need 2 crews. So either we would need to restart in February with 4 day a week service, or we could go 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So assuming everything with the aircraft comes through and the crew passes their training, we should be able to restart in some capacity come the first part of February. The Ultimate Jet contract ends March 14th. So they come back into the picture as a backstop of service at that time. So given the track record over the last 18 months of this Beech 1900, I'm not betting the farm that that's going to happen in February, but at least I'd say worst case, mid-March, we can have service restart. Now, I said that's been the bad news, except this next slide. My biggest concern right now is this issue, TSA. TSA has a policy that if you don't use or need TSA for 90 days, you lose them. And there is currently no capability to getting that service back once it is lost. That clock started ticking January 1st because 45 North does not have the paperwork to utilize TSA and to operate into the terminal in Midway. So they are operating into the FBO down in Midway. So TSA, basically most of the staff here is basically driving up to Traverse City, working out up there. Management still comes in on a day-to-day basis here, but they're not actually working here. So we are now 13 days into a 90-day countdown, which means we need to resume service by the end of March and service with TSA. So what we're currently doing with 45 North isn't enough for us to retain TSA. And if we lose that, again, there is no mechanism to get it back. And without that, that means we couldn't provide service into the terminal at any airport. You would basically be required to be shuffling people around from a non-sterile place into the terminal.
Oh, there's no good news lately.
So,
smokes.
again, with Ultimate Jet, their contract ending, this shouldn't be a problem even if everything else still falls apart. I think we're in a good position to regain sterile service mid-March. That is assuming that Public Chargers is still financially viable and still wants to provide service. So in some ways, we need them right now as much as potentially they want or need us, possibly more.
So Barry, if they got the Beech 1900 in service and working,
Yes.
that would
That would also accommodate
just up here.
Yes, because that would be technically operated under under Ultimate Jet's operating authority,
Okay.
even though the crews are essentially hired by Jim.
Now, why doesn't 45 North Keene Air Service qualify with these guys?
Because you basically need to go through a 6-month process with TSA
Oh.
to get your operations and processes certified that you operate securely.
Okay, okay.
And that's not something they do in their normal course of business, and so it's not something they have.
When did you say the public charters contract expired?
Our contract expires September 30th.
A year. A little less than a year from now.
Yes,
Okay.
9 months,
Okay.
less than 9, a little slightly less than 9 months from now.
Back when we had and I apologize, I don't remember which company it was, but when Public Charters was having the initial problem, we had to shuttle
Yep.
people.
Yep.
Was this 90-day thing discussed then, or was it not a concern then?
We've not had an extended period of non-sterile service because all of the, whether it was Ultimate Jet or Silver Airways, they've all had proper TSA.
But wasn't there a point in time when we were taking them and they couldn't land at the terminal at
Yes,
Midway?
yeah,
That didn't
but-
impact this?
It did in a sense that, you know, but those were generally for 2 or 3 day type periods. There wasn't an expectation that that was an ongoing thing, which right now, you know, we at least know for a month that's gonna be the case. So that's the difference, and quite honestly, this isn't something I've thought about since the last time we didn't have service for a period of time, which is in 2012. And when I notified TSA and they responded, well, that starts the clock, and it's like, oh yes, that's another factor to consider in this whole process.
Is there a minimum amount that you need, passengers or
I,
flights?
I've not wanted to start that conversation yet until I knew more about what options were. And at this point, again, I would certainly make the case that, well, if we have one
Right.
flight that requires TSA, that would reset the clock. They may not view it that way. And again, that can be contested, and, you know, you can make all sorts of, whether it be political pressure, legal, you know, debates on that. But I'm, you know, at this point, and I got an email from the head of TSA for our region on Friday, and I intend to respond either today or tomorrow with basically the fact that we are very confident that we will resume no later than mid-March.
So we should be able to retain it then, I guess.
As
If things
long
go-
as Public Charters still intends to fulfill their contract.
Yeah. Do we have any measures that we can take to require them to follow that contract?
The contract says they are required to provide service until a replacement is found, even if the contract ends before its official termination.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've seen before, financial viability can change that.
You sound like you have that concern.
I'm worried about worst case scenarios, so I have to think about those things. I don't think that that is necessarily the most likely outcome at this point, but you can't say that it's not potentially an outcome. So that's kind of the background I wanted to get to all of you before we dial Jim in. Any other questions?
So what do you think Jim's gonna tell us?
Based on my last call with him, he really wants to follow through to the best he can. He realizes he's
Put us in a pickle?
put us in a pickle, screwed things up,
Okay,
has no concept that he's going to continue after this contract, but he wants to fulfill through the end of the contract. Part of the reason for that is he's invested in this aircraft and the training and all of these things. If he doesn't actually operate it, he doesn't, you know, start recouping any of that cost. So And basically, even if, it doesn't happen until March, it still gives him 6 months of operations with it that starts helping to dig him out of the hole he's dug himself into.
Is he aware of the TSA situation?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
We've really lost a lot of passengers too, and you're saying it's gonna
yes.
be like 5 years before we can
Well,
get back to that level.
I don't know about that, but
It's,
that is where we are back to.
Yeah, that's gonna be difficult, very, very difficult.
This past year's kicked our butt, from the
Yeah.
last
It
6 months
has.
anyway. Summer was great, till now.
We were still down in the summer,
I know, but
and that was competitive issues with Traverse City Fairs. So, I mean, there are other clouds in the sky that are, working against us, but none of them is, significant as these issues.
Okay. Any other questions before Barry makes a call? Comments? Go ahead, Barry.
Hello, Jim Gallagher.
Hi, Jim, this is Barry and my board. You are on speakerphone. Sorry it took us a little bit longer to get to calling you, but I've
understand.
basically given them an update as to where we stand. And I guess I'll let you speak first, and then if we have questions, we can interact.
Barry, we're all listening, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize. It's not the New Year's wish that anyone would want, I can tell you that. We've been working very diligently to, try to deliver which we think is the right plane, especially in the off-season, but for the market, the Beach 1900 turboprop that runs the regular schedule that we're used to in Manistee that we've developed and ran for the past, 6 or so years. And of course, as you know, that hasn't happened yet. We've, had an off-season in the fall with the jet in a reverse pattern, which the performance was what we would expect, but it was not in the direction or the schedule was not the most ideal for the place. But the intention, of course, as you may be aware, was that we, in September, were going to change that aircraft out. When September came, we had 2 large problems that we didn't realize we need to be addressed. One was some conformity issues on the aircraft, where they learned that they had to do an FDR, a flight data recorder upgrade. We're not sure, because I looked at the plane in June, why it wasn't worked on or found prior to that. I guess it wasn't brought up in any of our conversation about maintenance. They had a change of the guard, so to speak, with a lot of the ops people at Ultimate. But either way, come September, we lacked not only the upgrade to the flight data recorder, but we also lost, out of 4 crew members that went for training, 3 of them did not pass. And in this crew environment, that is a crisis, not just a inconvenience. Anyone can point fingers at the sim places, if they had the right trainers or they were too harsh. I mean, I can tell you stories from the pilots that passed who were well qualified, that we were very, very surprised that they did not, complete the training program and be able to start flying the line. But that's where we're at even today. Right now, we have 1 first officer certified, and we have a captain in training as we speak. He's completed his ground school successfully. He had his first day of mission yesterday, which went very, very good. They feel very good about his capabilities. He is a captain that lives there locally in Chicago, so that helps. But basically, that is where we're at and what we have, is we have, the ability, over the next, I would say, 3 weeks, where he will complete his sim training. He will go through INDOC and IOE training, and then they'll be able to start flying the line. But of course, it would be a limited line because we only have 1 crew.
Jim, are you working on trying to get some more backup people in the pipeline here?
Of course we are. So I've never recruited so hard in my life, especially during, this time where the majors are just taking, all the crews in the world, and, paying them big sign-on bonuses, and there's just a very short, limited pool out there. I've had 3 guys say yes, and we've sent them the new hire package and their pre-employment paperwork, and then after a week of mulling on it, they've declined. We still have probably at least 2, if not 3 people considering it. I've given them the health benefits. I've given them, even we've raised up the stakes a little bit with a sign-on bonus because we really do need to get a second full crew set in there to meet our requirements. But I can tell you that I only have a first officer that has said yes. Highly recommended. So I feel he's got the talent, and any one of the crew members that I'm dealing with, we've kind of changed a little bit of our hiring motto. Each one of these, at least 2 out of 3 have been typed in the 1900 before, so we feel very good about their probability. And one was typed in a Metroliner, and flew that for Denver Air connection for a long time, which is at least he's got a lot of time in a turboprop. So we feel pretty good that these are really qualified guys. And not that our other ones weren't, but they were large jet guys. They were 767 captains. One was retired. He didn't make it. The other guy, I'm not sure. He was more of a jet. He didn't have a lot of jet time. He had a lot of single-engine turbine time. But he did have a lot of enough multi. He had a couple thousand hours of multi, so we didn't expect him not to pass. But we're a little gun shy about what who can get through this sim, and we can't just change sim companies, training companies at the snap of a finger. I mean, I can tell you that I probably won't go back there again for initial training with anybody, but I don't think they're unreasonable, other than I do think they have some, because I've experienced it through the write-ups of the other pilots, and even this weekend with our new guy, we have some young pilots in there that are, they're what they call, very good in the sim, but they're not pilots. They don't have a lot of actual flying time. They're young, but they do know, they know their call-ups, they know their profiles in the sim, the procedures, and they expect these non-1900 guys to know them, and they have to by the end. But I think that's part of where the conflict has come. But I've only experienced that firsthand this weekend, because I've gotten reports from people saying similar things, but literally this weekend with this new guy, he called me the minute it happened. We're in touch almost every night because I need to be sure what's happening. And I get a vote from the instructors and from our captain. And I've been able to talk both of them through I feel like a counselor through their issues of communication, which are very important. And yesterday he did very well, but I can tell you the one instructor he put with, we had to change him out. I requested a change because I could see that there was a problem in communication. been down and broken or walked out of a sim session, and that's not acceptable as an instructor. So I'm learning firsthand that there are some deficiencies at the sim, and they're a very high-rated sim. They work for a lot of 121 airlines. Highly recommended from people I know in the industry. Again, hindsight's always 20/20. I won't go there again, but I did find firsthand that there is a little bit of a problem. So I don't think we would have had maybe as many issues with previous pilots, but I don't know. I mean, they could have looked at flight safety and failed as well. I'm not sure. I can only say that I'm trying and coaching and working with what I have to make sure that we get a crew set out by the end of the month and start line flying with that 1900 as soon as possible. And then my next session for sim is in 7 days, which would be, and not that I can't move that, but I do have a session set up for the 20th. I have a first officer ready, but I usually send them in pairs, because I can do much good to have, first officer and not another captain. So I'm hoping this week we do get responses. I do have 3 out there saying, possibly, and they've gotten to the point of asking for the benefit package that they can evaluate. So it's not like they're, just looking at a resume and an offer, that they've gone through much more detailed conversations for about 3 weeks negotiating how they're going to get back and forth to Chicago, pictures of the condo, sign-on bonuses became an issue, and we agreed to it because we really need we're desperate for a captain, and we want a captain that has turboprop experience, not
Right.
something else.
Jim, these 3 potentials you're talking about, are they currently employed?
Yes, all 3 of them are currently employed.
Oh, okay.
Luckily, they're doing contract flying. All 3 of them are doing contract flying. So that there's a little bit of a benefit where the notice that they would have to give, and the idea that they can even fly on an off-week contract, because we don't prevent that, because we do a 1 week on, 1 week off schedule. I think that they might be able to manage a very short notice. They expressed a desire that they don't like their contract flying, they like our schedule. They may make a little bit more contract, but they don't know, because they don't know their schedule really that far in advance. So we've really rolled out the red carpet in treating these crews with a very good quality of life, a very good pay. We just want a good, safe, crew, 2 crews for this Beach 1900, and that's our goal.
Right, right.
So our backup, our fallback plan, and it's, I've just got to tell you, just give you everything, I might as well, but that that's all, our fingers crossed, the captain still does well like he did yesterday. He's very well yesterday. Comes out of school, and by the end of the month is ready to start flying the line. We will run a limited schedule on the 1900 until we can get 1 or 2 things. A second crew qualified, and then B, in March, I know that's still quite a ways away, but in March is when we get Ultimate back with our jet, that we can do at least get back into some type of a complete schedule between the use of the jet and the turboprop, if we don't have a second crew by that time.
Correct.
I would imagine by that time, I would hope, I'm not gonna.
Are you looking at contract flying?
Anything, but,
Are you looking at contract flying at all?
I'm sorry?
And sort of cover the gap, the contract flying that you were talking about?
Not that, it doesn't work that way in the 135 world. We can't just mean, I've offered day rates, which is kind of like contract flying, to everyone that's out there that we've tried to hire. But I can't just bring in someone, they gotta go through our in-doc, they gotta go through our sim. Even for type-rated, the FAA doesn't allow them to come online as a contract flyer without going through our whole program. So it's, you know, if they wanted to do, you know, I mean, I have offered people limited terms. You know, I gotta get some recoup back, but if you don't like it, in 7 months, because in 7 months of this contract, I think that gets us to our peak. You know, as okay, in 7 months, because by the time they get done, it'll be sometime in February. You know, you can, move on if you really don't like it, and if you don't like what we have to offer after that. Ultimate did step up where they allowed them to come in and first hire captains, which they don't do in their entire fleet. They don't hire captains, they hire first officers and then move them into the captain position. So one of the perks out there for all of these guys is that with Ultimate, they get to come in as a captain, so their seniority starts day one with the turboprop. So that's an incentive, and there is a program where Ultimate actually, when they get it, this plane on, their program is, to keep their whole crew pool going would be for the captains to train the first officers. When they get time, they move to lefty, and you just start a cycle. And because you always have some guys leaving for the majors or whatever happens, so it's like you constantly want to run a pool of crews going through, and that's how Ultimate has expressed that they would be doing for the 1900 as well. Even though we're going to get our first 2 crew sets, if we ever get them, and hopefully we get them soon, the opportunity for those crews to advance is there, and then we can look for the young ATPs that would never get into the airline, at least not as a captain, bring them in as a first officer, and then over a course of time train them to be captains. So I don't know that we'll get there in a full cycle with this contract, but the concept for the 1900 and cruise is the same that Ultimate does for their jets. So I don't know what to say other than I've never done more recruiting firsthand in my life, where I literally day to day calling people physically that they don't even have ads out there. I'm finding their resumes and calling them and saying, I see you're doing contract flying. Would you like a steady job for a while, and with the potential of moving into Ultimate, or maybe if we find something with the 1900, moving on with that. And that's literally what I've been doing for over a month now. I've had lots of very good positive responses, which people were surprised even they get this guy in so quickly after we had the failures, which I really wish I had more knowledge about the problems there while it was going on. And I can blame myself because I didn't want to interrupt Ultimate's crew kind of profile. They're an airline. I don't want to, they have a pay scale and the benefit program, and they have to pay the crews, and I wasn't trying to get favoritism. I was trying to let them do their regular process. They give us a little perk for the direct hire captains, but other than that, I mean, they've been hiring crews for years, and we're all quite surprised that 3 out of 4, I mean, to not have 3 failures it's a first for any one of us. I mean, I think guys at King Air School all the time, and I've never had, this has never had this. So we do think that there is a problem a little bit with the school and their training philosophy, because they're a little bit more geared toward the 121. I don't know. I mean, to have 3 failures is just shocking.
Yeah.
It's just,
So Jim, are we gonna get the ultimate jet back for sure then in, March?
Yes, March 10th or 11th, we'll get ultimate jetpack, 100%, but I do believe the 1900 is gonna fly a limited schedule. Prior to then, that'll be under the full AOSSP. And then I've not stopped my recruiting. I do have a first officer, I'm just waiting for a captain to
Right.
say yes.
Right.
They've all said that they're gonna tell me their answers this week. Now, whether I can buy them tickets to go to Sims in one day, so, and they're all know that Sims starts on January 20th. So that's my next slot for classes, to get them in. It's a 2-week class, so.
So where are these Sims, these classes at that you're talking about?
They're in ATS-Denver.
Oh, in Denver.
Training Service.
Okay.
They're a Denver outfit. They train Great Lakes crews. They trained a lot of Flight, which is the cargo operator's cruise. They're actually a very good, referral, and I mean, they seem like a very good shot. I don't know. We chose them because they were a reference of a very close friend of mine. So I'm struggling a little bit with the training center that sometimes you run into problems with training centers, but again, for them not to be able to get anyone through under their job is training, and we paid, just so you know, we almost put them through school twice by the amount of hours we gave them, and they selected through Ultimate that, hey, if we give them another 15 hours of sim, we think they're going to pass. So they gave them an extra 15 hours of sim and charged me for it, and they did pass still. So I really have problems with the judgment of whomever was doing the instructing there.
So Jim,
So it's very, very difficult.
Jim, if I could,
I am personally involved now. I mean, I'm day-to-day, every day I'm getting either text or I'm having conversations with the owner of the company. I'm actually talking directly to the instructor, asking for debrief on the sessions for every day. I can't take a chance that, that they just, blindly, fail someone and not, focus on the things they need training on, and listen to the captain when he says, look, I don't know this profile, so don't make me fly it because they're gonna fail me. So I'm kind of in the hand-to-hand combat with them in the sense of saying, look, I've talked to my captain, this is what he said he's ready for, he's gonna write it down, if you wanna train him on something else, you need to train him. You don't expect him to do it, and it's actually worked out well yesterday, so hopefully that'll continue down the right course.
so Jim,
Jim, Barry has a question now.
if you could give us updates on the efforts you put into trying to find subservice, to avoid what we're gonna see the end of this month. I think the board would be interested in hearing about that. And then also an update on the remaining issues on the certification of the 1900 itself.
Okay. I'll start with the easiest one, which would be the certification of the 1900. FA is back in review of the 1900 just because it's been months. They thought they were going to approve it, months ago. And they were only waiting for the FDR. That is the only remaining item. And there is only one parameter on the FDR that needs to be fixed. It's the RPM readings off of the engine. So everything else is working right. They were supposed to this weekend do a troubleshooting on the RPMs with a L3 Communications is the one that builds the FDR. But that guy's not available until today. So he'll log into a computer and he believes that he can help read the raw data and convert it into a software parameter because they're getting data they can't read this. So hopefully we're down there. That is the very last item on the FDR is getting the RPM to read every other parameter of the 2013 that
Keep service going.
for the FAA requirement, CFRs reads well, like it should. It's down to the RPMs. And it's been a painful install. I wish I'd sent it somewhere else, but I didn't. I sent it to Steiner Aviation has been around for 40 years. I mean, they've been in Akron, Ohio. They come highly recommended from every avionics shop and every avionics dealer in the country. They took on this project with a work joke that it was going to be 12 days, and it's been 3 months. I don't know what to say. I've experienced something that I didn't anticipate. Once they hit a brick wall with the FDR, they kind of left it. And it's been like, even though I've paid them lots of money, it's been like pulling teeth to get them to try to. We've sent in experts from other companies, like from the FCC holders. We've had techs on the phone, but they've been detached, saying they were too busy with, other ADSBs, and there's a big push in avionics, and I think when they couldn't get it done in 12 days, we just became kind of a redheaded stepchild, and they were non-responsive to me. I'm not pleased about it, especially with their reputation, but they've now picked up again. The communication chain is much better, and they've been working it little by little each week. But I think it's something that was over their head. I think they've never worked to this level on a flight data recorder, and I think it was too challenging for them. And I can't just throw the plane to someone else, when they have 90% of the work done. We've looked at every avenue of getting.
So Jim, when's the plane gonna be ready?
I'm sorry?
When's the plane gonna be ready?
I'm hoping that they're going to, the FAA's already started looking at the install paperwork, because we had to have some diagrams changed from the install, so they're already looking at the 8110s that were produced by the FCC holder. So we're in the conformity process. It might be done today. If it goes much more than today or tomorrow, I'll be amazed on getting the RPMs done. But they've had delays before where they kind of give up if they can't figure it out. I had not contacted them yet this morning. I contacted them this weekend. They said, their officers said that they wouldn't be able to get with L3 until today. So I didn't, I'll be calling them after this, probably two or so, just to give them, to try to get an update. I do call them every day for an update. Every single day I call, no matter what. I'm glad, believe it or not, I'm glad we're down to one parameter. They do believe it'll go quite quickly with the FAA. They feel about 2 weeks with the FAA, which, is everything's very, very tight.
So if they're done today, it's still 2 weeks before the FAA signs off.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's a concise answer.
Yep.
Okay.
So, subservice, as you know, we have,
So by the time you,
Church High and Low, we brought up the Sunny Flyer from Florida, Silver Airways, brought them in from Florida. We had them for a limited time. They would not extend the contract. They also have the inability to fly in the winter time because they don't have a de-icing program, because they're a Florida operation and a Caribbean operation. We have, of course, have gone to Ultimate, Corporate Flight Management. We've gone to East Coast Aviation. They have 19 seaters. They've actually reached 1900. We have gone to even to the level of the King conveyor operator like 45 North, who has been applying these past few weeks for us. They did get permission from their FAA that, which is why we ended up in a sub-service on Saturday, but they were, or not Saturday, Friday, so they're very concerned that they were exceeding their 4 times a week limitation. They're now fine with, actually their FAA told them that as long as you're doing on demand and they're not selling tickets to the public, then they can do 5, 6, 7 times a week. I don't think the DOT sees it that way, so I'm not going to get into the middle of that. What they will do is finish out. We have no passengers on Tuesday. We moved them to Thursday, so they'll fly today, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then we go into our break that we've notified the DOT of. And now, of course, I would bring them back in if I had to for a week, or anyone else if I can, find them for the first week of February. Hopefully, it doesn't go beyond that for bringing on the 19-seater
Correct.
limited schedule, which would be on Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday. And then as soon as Ultimate is free in March, then we would fill in the midweek stuff with them, of course.
Could you repeat that date in March when you said Ultimate Jet's coming back?
March 10th. Well, I'm hoping that we have a second crew and we have a full complement of 19-seater prior to that.
Right, that'd be
But
great,
the
that'd
worst
be
case
great.
scenario is
But it
you'll
sounds,
get AOSSP ops with let's hope this crew gets through, that with this crew and this aircraft.
And just so everyone knows, AOSSP is TSA. That's the paperwork.
So that'll get you 4 days a week, AOSSP. And the only reason it's limited to 4 is because that
ASOP was,
I might be able to get it up to
TSA.
5, but because we have the Saturday off, I can only work so many days a week in their contract. If I won't answer more for the first month, we might get a
Has she
little
answered
bit
your
more.
question?
I just gotta be careful on how I balance the crews, but we'll do everything we can do once we get a crew on board. We won't spare any expenses there, but just in the timeline, we get back to AOSSP operations. That
Right.
should start with the first crew with the 19-seater as much as they're willing to fly, and I will incentivize them to fly. But I gotta give them time off, so I think that the best I'm gonna get with the Saturday day off is Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday. Then I gotta give them at least 2 days off.
okay, well, let's get them flying before you give them time off.
What's that?
I said, let's get them flying before you give them time off.
So, Jim,
I agree.
the last question I have for you is, are you able financially to weather this storm? Because obviously that has issues for us if, how you answer that question.
So we have budgeted out the scenario that I have just walked you through. And we are, I will say this, here's the worst case scenario. If this crew does not come, if this crew member, the first crew member, for some reason doesn't make it through this class, that will, the only thing I would be able to, I think, and stay on my feet. And I don't know that we won't reflow some budget, but if you were looking at a worst case scenario, would be, and I don't give up easy, but, because if I had another crew right behind it, I may go another round, because it's kind of the way I am, but, and then financially I can afford that, but the worst case scenario is laid out that we get a crew, that I can subservice another, prime days for the first week of February, which I'm actually working on now, just as a backup, because I think we're probably going to need it. So we have something opening up by the end of the first week. We should be, if this crew comes through, we'll be flying a limited schedule with the crew on Ultimate, and then we backfill feed with Ultimate we can go through the entire process, which would be fulfill our contract. Ultimate has agreed to give me a very favorable rate and to bake the plane in Manistee for the summer like they always have done. So once we get to the summer peak flying, you would have the jet and a 19-seater flying the route, which, in some ways it may be going out at least with a little bit of grace, fulfilling something that can meet the demand, hopefully the demand if we don't lose it all, for the summer. So that's how it's budgeted. We've survived so far. It's not been pretty, but I've reached into, our own pocket, so to speak, and, but I think that's my obligation as well. We're not a broke company. I still, I'm running, business as normal, and luckily my fixed base operation here in Scranton pumped an extra 400,000 gallons this year, so we're actually, our economy here is very, very strong. So I may be robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I can't do that forever, but right now we're kind of at our max. We're kind of in our point where, like, even not getting paid very quickly from the government would hurt us a little in cash flow. But our budget is to get us through, and I think if we don't get another avalanche dropped on us, I think we'll be fine. And I'm not going to say we're not going to lose money, but it's budgeted, so.
Does the board have any other questions?
No.
Well,
No other questions, Jim, thank you.
Yep, and I do apologize. This is definitely not something that I ever would have wished on me or you. And hopefully we'll be able to pull it back together before too much damage is done.
Yeah, I hope so too, because it does look kind of grim from this end. And
I understand.
we're sad that it's happened also. So anyway, thank you. Barry,
And I'll keep you updated.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thanks, Jim.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
well, he said he's gonna have a plane in on March 10th. You think he is?
from all the stuff he's talking about, it's slim.
Very recent.
Well, March 10th, again, that's Ultimate
Okay,
Jet
that's
coming back
Ultimate
with the
Jet,
jet.
yes, we'll have
That,
that. But,
assuming he can pay the bills,
Yeah.
they've been operating for multiple years now, that's a good backstop. Anything with regards to the 1900, there are multiple hurdles, from hiring crew or training crew at this point, getting a second crew, and finishing the certification mechanical work, and then,
he's gonna
getting
be-
that through the FAA approval process.
It's gonna be
Those
very,
are
very-
all unknowns. Any one of them could be a hiccup.
From what he's talking about, it'd be very, very lucky to have this 1900 in service by the middle of February.
I think that's a likely case.
Yeah. Right,
Yep.
but it won't be the end of this month.
Right.
Jeez. Man, he can talk around and around in circles, can't he?
How does he ever get anything
Oh,
done?
smoke. Did he take a breath on the train?
I didn't take a hint either when I said that was a concise answer.
Oh, that was one of the few concise answers he gave you. So anyway,
So I'll continue then with my report.
okay, go ahead.
So DOT grant billing, if you'll recall, there was some delays in getting payments to public charters for the service they provided back in September and October. And this all comes around the fact that everyone's been planning since September that they're gonna be operating 19-seat aircraft. So when they start doing things different, which has been 30-seat aircraft, DOT's invoicing system isn't capable of handling that. And I keep telling DOT, well, what I originally asked for is just make it so that this can happen anytime the rest of the contract, but they're insistent of doing it on a month-by-month basis. And back in October, I said, well, no later than the end of November, it should be resolved. Well, obviously it isn't. So the December invoice is currently on hold until they do their paperwork to allow billing under the 30-seat aircraft for December. I guess did the payment for November come through yet? Because I was anticipating that to come through last week.
Yes, it did.
Okay, so they should have received payment then last week on that. Okay. They've been asking me, and it's like, well, with the holidays, who knows what schedules.
Yeah, when the
end up.
auditors were here, I did see something that came
Okay,
through.
okay, good. So they've been paid through November for service. December will be delayed because DOT has to go through extra hurdles. And so, and Jim alluded to the fact that, as long as they're getting timely paid by DOT, because that's the bulk of what's paying for this. And it's not as timely as it should be, but that's just because it keeps changing. So, just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
Is the DOT aware of the things going on with us too?
I emailed them last week a very long description as to where we are, so that they were aware, because I didn't want them to, if things really did go south and we needed to work with DOT to come up with a solution at that level, I didn't want it to be a surprise to them. So they are aware that there are challenges.
Were they amenable to dealing with them?
They didn't even respond.
Okay.
But I just told them this is for information only, I'm not asking for your help at this time,
Okay.
but you need to be aware. Looking forward, so next round of essential air service, again, assuming public charters makes it through September, and assuming we want them to make it through September, and that's, those are things that we need to think about, all of those different scenarios. Here are the list of airlines. I've shared this with you in the past, but on the first two, SkyWest had requested an update of kind of airport information. I got that to them last week, and I have a conference call scheduled with Cape Air tomorrow to start talking about our situation and how they might be interested in possibly bidding for us in the next round of bids. I've not reached out to anyone else on this list yet.
Do you get information on, how consistent they are with their,
Yes, I mean, generally when they submit a response to the RFP, they incorporate that. But for most of these, there's the word of mouth that you see as to which carriers people are unhappy with and which they are happy with. So I have both anecdotal as well as there will be more specific information in there.
I would assume some of these are pretty stable and have got, they're act together.
Yes, I mean, but let's take SkyWest. I mean, SkyWest, major regional carrier, operate in hundreds of airports, a United partner, and Houghton, who they currently service, Houghton Hancock, really would like not to see them there anymore. Because in the winter, because they operate out of O'Hare, and if there are weather issues in O'Hare, United starts canceling flights, and United cancels the 50-seat carriers, because if you're gonna you can only get so many takeoffs and landings per hour when the weather degrades. And United is basically gonna say, well, we're going to get the planes carrying 150, 200 people, and we're gonna have to cancel those that are carrying 50. So Houghton's very unhappy, but yet they are, a very good carrier, but that becomes an issue. There's 2 airports in Illinois who have just gone through reselection. One of them had SkyWest and one of them had Cape Air. And the one that had Cape Air has chosen SkyWest because they want the shiny jet. And the one that had SkyWest has chosen Cape Air because they were unhappy with the reliability in winter. So, yes, there are many up there that are good, but each one has its pros and cons. So, week before last, I was actually on vacation. My entire family and I flew to North Carolina to visit my oldest son. And when you're buying 5 airline tickets, you really go with the cheapest. And that happened to be out of Muskegon on SkyWest through O'Hare. So while I was in O'Hare and on my layover, I walked over and visited the gate down there that Cape Air uses along with Air Choice One. I talked with the staff, just got a feeling for things, where that gate is in relationship to other things. So I'm, had an opportunity to do a little, kind of behind the scenes research while I was going through O'Hare. I mentioned this last month, but I had requested in my previous conversation with the DOT that they structure our RFP for the next round to provide extra flexibility for our seasonal needs. Because unlike most EAS airports, we are very seasonal with the difference between our summer demand and our winter demand. And the standard one box size fits all doesn't really work for us. And there are some options out there, and when I reached back out to them last week after the holidays, they said that they still hadn't had those internal conversations yet. Which means that they haven't yet started work on our RFP, which I'm still anticipating they will get out this month, especially with some of the prodding and knowing the situation here. But it's not coming out imminently. That process, from releasing the RFP to having a new carrier start, the shortest I've really ever seen it is probably on the order of 5 months. And it can take 8 months to do that. So if they are expediting it, and we so chose to end our contract early, really May, June would be the earliest we could get anybody else in here through this process. And that is what it is. So, and again, that's where that TSA 90 days, we need that clock to restart at least once to get us to the earliest we could get someone to replace Jim. And I already mentioned that. I told DOT about our challenges. Any questions on all of that? That's kind of my air service state of the world set of slides.
So you really just need one flight in, is that what you're saying too, or not more than one?
I'm sure if I asked TSA, they would say, no, that's not sufficient.
Mhm.
If that's all we had, then we would, pursue that through legal and political means to make that be sufficient. But
Okay.
I don't know for sure. So since we're in January, the first of the year, I pulled together just some numbers for last year. Our retail jet fuel sales were about 33,000 gallons. That's actually down 26% from the year before. Now, the year before was the best year by far. 33 is not atypical for, let's say, 3-4 years ago. That's kind of where we were. It's definitely behind where the last 2 years were. Our retail sales of avgas, aviation gasoline, were 6,400 gallons, which is a 16% decrease. And that is kind of the running rate going back probably 3-4 years. Passenger bookings, or passengers that flew for the year, 8,157, a 14% decrease. And bookings, and the reason there's a difference is bookings are kind of more future looking. as well as the fact that sometimes people book and then don't end up flying. That was down 15%. So all of these things directly tie into our finances. For every gallon of fuel we sell, that's 15 cents to the airport. So those decreases are important. For every passenger that flies, that's $4.50 in PFC taxes. So those are numbers. So the overall issues with the airline, some of these are not airline issues. You know, fuel. This is retail, so this has nothing to do with airline from fuel sales. These are all kind of winds out there that are negatively impacting our finances, and that's something, you know, we all need to be thinking about as we, you know, are moving forward. So if you thought all that wasn't bad, here's the next round of bad news. So
Oh, Barry.
on Monday, December 30th, I got a call from my ops guy at about 7:30 in the morning. He had just gotten a call from the air carrier that was supposed to be operating for Jim that day, a company called Freight Runners out of Milwaukee. And they basically called him and said, we can't fly in there because there's a NOTAM. We talked earlier what a NOTAM is. It's basically a message out to operators and pilots that says our ILS is down for the foreseeable future. ILS is the instrument landing system. It's basically the system we have here that lets aircraft to allow to land and take off during adverse weather conditions. This time of the year, adverse weather conditions are pretty much a daily basis. It turns out that this was the first I knew about this. It actually turns out that the ILS was first NOTAMed out on December 6th. It took until the 30th for anyone to mention that. The reason for that is the ILS is kind of the old school technology that's been around for decades, and that is slowly being replaced by GPS navigation systems. We have both, and Ultimate Jet's been operating using the GPS-based approaches, and no one was notified of this issue. Even the FAA people in Traverse City who maintain the ILS equipment had no clue that there was a NOTAM out since they were still doing their weekly checks on the equipment. Complete lack of communication within the FAA. What has happened is we have another navigation aid called a VOR on the airfield. Our VOR is historic in some ways because it used to be located in Texas on LBJ's ranch.
I
It
know
got
where that's at. I've been there.
decommissioned
It's good.
and got installed up here. It's old equipment and it is basically starting to fail. VORs themselves are being decommissioned, and it is scheduled for complete decommissioning in 2023. About 18 months ago, it was discovered that there were some issues with it, and the FAA basically has significantly restricted its use. And that has been, NOTAMed out there for about 18 months. Well, no one noticed that our ILS approach is actually dependent on the VOR. That was just noticed in December that says, oh, you can't have an ILS because your VOR isn't functioning properly. The latest I've heard on this is to address this issue through normal channels is a 24 to 36 month process. So we have this issue, and right now no reasonable time frame for it to be addressed. And the FAA doesn't, I mean, essentially their lack of communication has gotten us to this point where we are. I mean, if we'd known this 18 months ago, we'd be well into this process. How does this impact us? Well, any aircraft that is not equipped with the basically best GPS navigation equipment cannot realistically land here in conditions where it's cloudy, rainy, snowy, etc. Most aircraft are moving into the direction of having this equipment because this stuff is over time going to be decommissioned. But not all is, and that's why, you know, that issue came up on the 30th, and what ultimately happened is they ended up operating into Traverse City, and Dial-A-Ride shuttled the passengers from here to Traverse City, and then from Traverse City back to here to accommodate that flight that day. This is still really early in this process, since it's been less than 2 weeks since I've even known of this issue. And, you know, so we're myself and our consultants are working on this. My concerns would be that this might be a reason for certain air carriers not to bid on us, knowing, depending on what their equipment is and what timeline they have for basically installing newer equipment in their aircraft, such that we could potentially have an issue or one or two fewer bidders because of this issue.
Question,
Yes.
can you recondition the VOR?
That is, the FAA, from a budget standpoint, has basically said it is not worth them fixing it.
Okay. But it is doable.
If that is probably, that may be the most expeditious route to getting this addressed, and then that would become possibly a political issue of applying the appropriate pressure to free up funds to make that fix happen. So there are, you know, different scenarios that could unfold as we go down this process.
We just have to get LBJ working on this.
So,
That's interesting.
I just don't want to be the bearer of
How do you
continuous
come
bad
up with all
news.
these things there?
But you may all think this is a great winter because it's warm.
Oh, yeah.
From an airport perspective, this is a terrible winter. Because we hate temperatures between 25 and 40. Basically, temperatures right around freezing, because then the precipitation we get tends to be the icy type as opposed to the white fluffy snow type. White fluffy snow, plow, brush, we can take care of that all day. You get ice on the runway, we are very limited to what we can do, other than wait a few days for nature to take care of itself, or we apply de-icing fluid. De-icing fluid runs about $6 a gallon. We this year purchased 1,000 gallons, so we've had about a $6,000 bill for that. And in a typical year, we'll use less than 500. We've already used all 1,000 gallons and we need to order more. So we basically burned through $6,000 worth of de-icing fluid already, and we're at the beginning of January. We want it to get cold, or we want it to stay above 40. This range that we're in is just terrible because it melts and then it freezes, and then you just have ice, and planes and AC runways don't work very well together.
Well, Barry, I'd definitely say I would go after the de-icer to avoid having an icy runway to cause other problems.
Well, I mean, if the thing is that if, I mean,
Do it.
from a safety perspective, we will either make that runway safe or that runway will be closed. So that's not the issue. But if the runway's closed, then we're canceling flights. And fortunate or unfortunate, we don't have flights for 2 weeks this month. So that in some ways addresses some of those issues. PFAS updates. Nothing really new except that each year we have an opportunity to apply for some extra grant funding through MDOT, and we're looking at applying to kind of cover the delta between the existing funding we have in place and the total cost of that project through this grant. And I'm still waiting on quotes from Northern Pump and Sparling on the fuel system monitor. Land acquisition, Prina Newhoff is putting together the full reimbursement package I had mentioned to you last month, which includes basically reimbursement for all of these costs that generally have already been incurred by us. So that will help our overall fund balance once we get reimbursement for those items. Nothing really to update here as far as the runway resurfacing project, still scheduled, I'll say tentatively for right after Memorial Day. No one's really, at this point, actively doing anything on that, but that's still where that stands. I did last week get the comments I've been waiting for from Prina Newhoff on our wildlife survey. Now I need to take that back to USDA to kind of wrap up that project. And then as far as I know, Prina Newhoff hasn't really moved forward on our new project this year, which is the update to our airport layout plan. Marketing, we're basically pretty much quiet from a marketing until service issues with the airline get addressed. However, some of the things that are in the marketing plan for this year are a redesign of our website, because our website, as it has evolved over the course of the last 8 years with public charters, is essentially the de facto website for the airline. So that's where people primarily go to book. Looking forward to having a different carrier, that will no longer be the case. So we need it to be more of an airport website and less of an airline website. So that's part of our budget for this year, is to redesign the website in anticipation of new carrier coming on board. And also working with marketing on kind of thinking about marketing related direction to the board as it relates to new carrier selection. And that is, oh, actually, I'm gonna go back to the beginning, 'cause I skipped over 2 slides, which is airfares are nothing that different from where we've been the last couple months. Traverse City still is remarkably priced for historic, by any historic measures. They're doing well with their fares out of Traverse City. We in Muskegon are kind of about the same. Grand Rapids, as is typical, is looking pretty good. So, not much changing there. Overall, our numbers for, I guess I covered this in my other report, but these are the raw numbers for December for employments and on time. So that's my report.
Okay, very one, just to follow up, we got that out because we gave you permission to sign this for MDOT last time around.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
And I was just looking at that, there's the difference in price from one to the other, $49,000, is that what we're asking for the repayment of the lines and so on?
Yes,
Okay,
Any word on whether that strike's been settled yet with our pavers?
No, and it's unclear whether they resolved the strike or not.
I'm trying to remember, were we told that even if the strike is still on, they're still okay with this project?
That is what we have been told.
Okay.
Is that in a piece of paper somewhere that people have signed?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
okay. Any other new business I'm not aware of? Old business?
So I'll talk to both of these. So first with Ted Aaron's land lease. since we don't have the 1900, we don't have the need for Ted Aaron's hangar, so therefore, from my perspective, that's probably not going to
Right,
happen,
that's-
because the need for it goes away. Ted still has a hangar with a door that's not safe, but that's now his issue, and, you know, if he were still to entertain, you know, offloading that to us, I'm sure we would still entertain that discussion, but there's no driving
So if,
factor right now.
if Jim gets his Beach 1900 going by the end of December, middle of February, will we need that? Will he come
I
back?
think by that
and
time,
request-
we're coming out of
So you don't think he'll
winter,
request
and
what he
I
had
think,
before?
I don't think it
Okay.
would make
'Cause I think
sense
the last
for
time we did
4
mention
weeks.
we just let Ted set for a while.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I think we can drop that off of old business.
Right, for a little while.
Till if it
Right.
ever comes back. Ryan Shively's lease agreement. So, as was mentioned earlier, we've not been able to get from our attorney the documents that the committee had discussed. So therefore, we're not in the position of actually approving an agreement with Mr. Shively. He is going ahead as if all of this is wrapped up. So he's installed the new frame for the door, all of these things are moving forward. My concerns are, without any agreement in place, the liability for everything he's doing falls on us, because he's essentially making significant modifications to our hangar with potentially no insurance covering him or any issues. So I'm concerned that work is ongoing even though an agreement is not in place.
Have you contacted him
Would
lately?
you, I was gonna say, would you like to?
I
Okay,
haven't yet
George.
because I've been anticipating that at this meeting, all of that would come together, and
But it
then
hasn't, so,
when Doug contacted me last week, I started to get nervous, and then when nothing came in over the weekend from George, and, not another meeting scheduled for a month, I am at this point raising that as an issue.
okay.
So, looking for direction and
Would you
whether,
try to, I'm gonna say, would you try to contact George and see what's going on? And if you don't get anything, say like by Wednesday or Thursday, give me a call and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Then we'll both go down and see George.
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
Because I know what you're saying, we're hanging out there a little bit. And in this case, if we get a lot of snow, nothing's gonna happen on this project, so that standpoint would be good. Okay, Barry, all set?
Yep.
Okay. It looks like we've got one more definite piece of business to take care of. That's setting the regular meeting schedule for 2020. I think everybody got a copy of the proposed. Did everybody get a copy of the calendar also? It looks pretty close to what we have this year, just a shifting of the dates a little bit for the Mondays. But it's still at noon on the third Monday of each month, except for January and February. Does anybody have a problem with that? Otherwise, I'm gonna say let's have a vote for yes, accept it. Otherwise, do I need a motion to accept it? Okay, somebody make a motion to accept the proposed schedule for 2002?
I'll make that motion.
And I'll, okay. We'll go have a verbal vote, or do we need a, okay. Let me hear the yeses. Yays?
Yeah.
Yays. I like yes better than no's, or yays. The no's? Okay, pass. Okay, any other comments by authority members today? And a kind of exhausting one, Jim is pretty exhausting.
He makes me
What?
speechless.
What is that?
Makes everybody speechless.
Yeah, okay.
if anyone, if you think of anything, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I know there's a lot of things going on right now, and you know, Phil, your first meeting, you've got a lot to just, it's like a open the fire hose and welcome. But, you know, if you got any questions, reach out to me and I can, you know, fill in or provide additional guidance. A lot of acronyms were used when Jim talks that, you know, a lot of you probably aren't familiar with, so I can fill in to the extent I can, so.
Have you got any comments for us? Fill us in a little bit about yourself and
Well, you want me to tell you about myself?
you know, yeah, what made you decide you wanted to step into this committee?
Good question. Well, I do have an airplane here. I'm a active licensed pilot. Always had an interest in aviation, wherever I can remember as a little kid, watching the plane fly overhead and saying, I'm gonna learn how to fly one of these days. I was probably about maybe 8, 10 years old, whatever. Well, at 23, I got my private license. I started right here at this airport and finished up in Tri-City. I took a sabbatical for a number of years, and what got me back into it was when the B-17 came in town, when the airport was dedicated. I took a ride in that, and that just got me started again, so whatever. So I got current then and bought my airplane. I'm a retired electrician, retired electrical inspector. I had worked a little bit after I retired, a little over, well, it'll be 10 years ago. Yeah, 11 years ago this month. I worked a little bit, and so I didn't really feel that I could put full time into perhaps getting on the board, but I have decided I'm totally done with full-time, part-time, or any-time work, and so I felt if there's anything I can add to this board, then I'm willing to try and help. So here I am.
Well, welcome on board, Phil.
What kind of plane do you own?
Pardon me?
What kind of plane do you own?
I have a what's called an Archer 2, Piper Archer 2.
Okay.
It's a 181, 180 horsepower, 4-seat, low wing.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I'll say the meeting's adjourned.